Welcome to Survival Mode Disrupted, the podcast for those who are done performing, done people pleasing, and done living life on autopilot. I'm your host, Letitia, the Survival Mode Disruptor, and this is where we create disruptive, unapologetic transformations for those who are ready to exit survival mode and reclaim their power. Every episode is your permission slip to burn the rule book, break the cycle, and finally build a life that feels like yours. So let's disrupt everything that's holding you back and start living life on your own terms. Welcome to Survival Mode Disrupted. This is your trigger warning. This podcast contains unfiltered conversations about trauma, abuse, and survival. Discretion is advised. This is not therapy or medical advice, just real people sharing real stories. So please take care of yourself and pause if you need to. If this conversation hits home, grab the book Survival Mode Exit Plan, your raw, unapologetic blueprint to break free. Available now by scanning the QR code or clicking the link in the comments. Hello, 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 and welcome back to Survivor Mode Disrupted. I am Letitia, the Survivor Mode Disruptor, and I am super excited to have Melissa here today. Melissa, why don't you introduce
Mhm.
yourself?
Yes, hi. Thank you for having me. So I'm Melissa Winger, and I am the author of a book called Who Cares? The Real Patient Experience. And it is about my son. I have a son who is now 29 years old, and he has significant disabilities from a chromosome disorder. So he has medical needs that affect every single organ system and severe developmental disability and autism. I wrote the book to share our journey through birth all the way through to long term care.
Very nice.
Mhm,
We're talking about survival mode on this
mhm,
podcast. I would really love to hear about your journey
mhm.
to survival mode.
Yes, thank you. It was hard to actually figure out that I was in survival mode. But when you have it, I was had my child at 18 years old. And from that moment, it was medical care and treating him throughout his entire life. And so his needs came first. All of his stuff made priority over mine. And I just want to focus on one story because I think this is kind of explains how difficult this is. And this is coming from trauma that my son had versus me as his mother having to or trying to protect him.
Okay.
So just one incident happened. So we are reliant on caregivers in all aspects of his life. So this happened in high school, and remind you, he's nonverbal and he's very medically fragile. So just what happened between him going from one class to another with an aide, this aide had left him to go do something else. And so my son was in the hallway, and he got a bunch of kids came running around the corner, and he got kind of pushed into a big cement pole. And being that he has medical issues, his bones are quite fragile. So he had broken almost every bone on one half of his body. So his arm, his hip, his femur, laying on the ground. The aide had finally come back to him and actually lifted him up from his good arm, dragged him up a flight of stairs, and pushed him into a metal chair in front of the office and left him there. And my son has doesn't he goes into shock if he's in pain. So he doesn't cry, he doesn't yell, like he can't ask for help because again he can't speak. And it took a while for someone to come out of that office and realize something is wrong with him. His arm was 3 times the size it was supposed to be. They call 911. Again, people in the office didn't know. They just saw my son sitting in front of the office. Call an ambulance. We meet him at the hospital. He looks like he's in shock. He's barely blinking. And all I was told was he fell. He fell. And I was like, that fell from what? The roof? How does someone get injured like this from a fall? And so we treated him, and he's ends up with major surgery, and now he's in a wheelchair, and no answers from the school except for he fell. Finally, an investigation happened. They looked at all the videos and got the story of what happened. So immediately filed a complaint against the school with the Department of Education. And it came back that there was no liability or no accountability because aides, they call them like paraprofessionals, they're not medically trained to identify an injury. And that was that. Now, that's one story. That has happened. Things like this have happened to him throughout the course of his life. And this is where I struggle because as a mom, I have one job to do, protect my child. And I couldn't protect him. I couldn't protect him from any of these events that happened by, medical error in the hospital to him, to later at his group home. And it has been and I still really have not been able to process it, if that makes any sense. But because my job is to protect him and I couldn't. Mm-hmm.
As a mother,
Mm-hmm.
I set her in pain
Mm-hmm.
as you told that story.
Yeah. Yeah.
Angry even.
Right.
Um, and I can imagine, and probably not in the fullest,
Mm-hmm.
how this impacted you.
Yeah.
Because as you said, your one rule as his mother
Mm-hmm.
is to protect him.
Yep.
How did you deal with, and we'll stick to this story,
Yeah. Yeah.
how did you deal with having to process
Mm-hmm.
all of this? Because it's not just his healing,
Mm-hmm.
it's now having to manage the
Mm-hmm.
investigation and deal with the outcome
Yep.
and the lack of accountability.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Yep.
let's talk about that a bit more. Like, how was that for you?
I feel like it was sort of going through a grief process. You're angry, you're in denial, right? Then you have to just accept it. I have a problem accepting it. I don't want to accept it. I want there to be justice. And I feel that this is a community, or this is a group of people that have no justice and have no voice in our system. And it has caused me so much anger because I am tired of having to defend that my son has value in this world. Yes, he might have disabilities, but he is a human being and he is not more or less than any of us, right? And I've had to defend that. And that is an extremely sad place to be, that you have to and I'm going to be very honest, is that I'm tired of having to defend it because I feel like you should not have to, that human beings are human beings. They don't have a value in our society. And I realize that they absolutely do. It's not talked about, but it's definitely something that happens. The just, and this was later dealing with a same kind of an incident at the group home that he lives in now, a few years ago. And it was, you go to the police and they were very honest with me and said, yeah, we don't even look into these cases of potential harm because the witnesses are unreliable. And so they're never prosecuted. And just all of these things that I learned over the years was awful, just awful. And it's like you just had to accept that if you wanted help, that you needed help to take care of my son, who's 24/7 care, that's almost something you just have to deal with, that there might be people that do harm out there. And so it's a very sad place to be. And then on the flip side, there's the shame involved because I tried to speak up through social media. And the response I got was, you put him there. You trusted this caregiver. You should have homeschooled him. You should have protected him. You should not put him in a group home. You should not rely on caregivers. You take care of him. You're his mother. It was like people Not, I didn't even realize that I would get the finger pointed at me. Hey, you put him in these situations, which is even worse.
I am really happy that I muted myself. The amount of grunts
Mm-hmm.
out
I
of
know.
irritation, right? And
Yeah.
this is me standing on the sidelines,
Mm-hmm.
listening. And this is not something I expected to bring up, but I'm going to bring it up because it's something
Yes.
that infuriates me
Mm-hmm.
immensely.
Mm-hmm.
Society is very quick to blame the victim.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
They have no consideration for how their lack of consideration
Mm-hmm.
is so damaging to the people who are
Mm-hmm.
experiencing a disjustice, even in the way that they operate in life.
Mm-hmm.
And it pisses me off, to say the least, right? And I'm sitting here and I had so many other questions for you,
Yeah.
but this story, I mean, and I can imagine that they are amplified and so many more because he is 29 and has
Yeah.
never been able to advocate
Mm-hmm.
for himself.
Mm-hmm.
And that role has solely been on you.
Yeah.
And you did say, before you actually started going into the story, that you didn't even recognize that you were in survival mode. Do you, and I
Mm-hmm.
want you to be honest here, do
Yeah.
you think, based on the continued responsibility,
Mm-hmm.
that you have exited survival mode? Or are
Mm-hmm.
you in a space that is just maybe better functioning?
Mm-hmm. No, I have turned my anger and my disappointment in our society into advocacy and writing a book and not going into the sidelines and be like, well, that happened. My mind frame switched to, well, that's never going to happen again.
Okay. So
And I
let's
can't,
talk
yeah,
about
yeah.
let's talk about what caused that shift, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what was it that made you recognize that you were in survival mode?
Mm-hmm.
And then what created that switch
Yeah.
for you to now move into a
Mm-hmm.
space of empowerment, right? Using your voice
Mm-hmm.
instead of silencing yourself,
Mm-hmm.
which often happens when we are in survival mode.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it came in when I started researching on maybe the first few times I was like, okay, well, that's accident. Didn't that was purposeful, well, whatever. And then it kept happening. And that's when I just dove into the research. And then I dove into the research on this happens to so many vulnerable adults, people with disabilities. That's when the switch happened, that I realized I'm not going to get anywhere just sitting and being angry and and disconnecting from people because I didn't want anyone to give me that shame, that victim, the blame the victim thing. I was like, not going to have that. And I knew my story. I knew what my son went through. And I had this, it's not going to happen to the next person. And I had to take that into, it's not, we tend to sue a lot of people in the United States. That wasn't going to happen. That I'm not suing people. Also, because I learned that they don't pay much attention to these cases. So now I have to go and I have to change the system. And that made me feel like that it switched to maybe then my son was given to me. And my son has a chromosome disorder that he's the only one that has it. There's not even a name for it. He's missing half of his fourth chromosome. That maybe I was given, he came into this world and he outlived all of his expectancies. He's only expected to live to 5, 6 years old. He's 29. I thought, we have a purpose. What happened to my son, unforgivable, and I still feel horrible for it. But maybe it gives light to all the things that happen to people that don't have a voice, they don't have an advocate. And we need to use our story and say, no more. No, people with disabilities have a voice. And it gave me this sense of wow, you can make a difference and you can change things. This is not a group of people that protest and are loud and screaming and going to their government officials because they don't tend to not have a voice. They sit in silence. And this is people in nursing homes and assisted livings, and they just sit and they suffer. And I said, no, no more. I'm writing this book, talking about everything, and going on platforms like yours and saying, no, we're not going to deal with this anymore.
I love that.
Mm-hmm.
I one of the things I talk about the accident of survival
Mm-hmm.
mode all, all the
Yeah.
time. Um, and I always liken it to three phases. And you
Mm-hmm.
literally just spoke to that, right? You
Okay.
became aware of the circumstances that you were
Mm-hmm.
in. You had to reprogram the way that you were thinking about yourself,
Mm-hmm.
right? You took radical ownership in that reprogramming,
Yes.
which allowed you to reinvent the way that you showed up. Right?
Mm-hmm.
It went from, oh, I'm hopeless to I'm hopeful.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm so empowered that not only am I speaking up for myself,
Yep.
I'm speaking up for
Yes.
everybody else because
Mm-hmm.
we're not talking about this enough.
No.
You know, that is so amazing. But
Mm-hmm.
I want to go back to the victim shaming element for a second,
Yeah.
right? Because if I'm honest,
Mm-hmm.
one of the reasons why I pivoted into this particular area, talking about the residual impacts of trauma and really wanting to bring awareness to
Mm-hmm.
the wider audience, was because I was highly triggered
Mm-hmm.
by the commentary I saw after Cassie came out about Diddy, right? And I don't want to go
Yeah.
into
Yes.
like the specifics about that, but what
Mm-hmm.
really bothered me is how people were so vocal
Mm-hmm.
in tearing this woman down who
Mm-hmm.
had the ability, even after years, the courage
Mm-hmm.
to step up and say it's not
Yes.
enough. And it was something that was like, I want to speak up on this. And this is why I was like, I didn't expect to have this conversation with you today,
Yeah.
but I think it's a conversation that we need to have, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think people recognize how damaging
Mm-hmm.
victim shaming is. I
Mm-hmm.
don't think they recognize how far-reaching the
Mm-hmm.
effects of it are. I mean, you spoke about the shame, the anger.
Yeah.
Can we go into it a little bit more? Because I really want the audience to wrap their mind around a simple flipping comment really has a
Yeah.
long-lasting effect.
That is where we are in this world now with the quick social media. I can say whatever I want. Takes 2 seconds and then you shut your phone off or whatever and you don't think of it again. You just, I'm going to say my piece and it might be extremely hurtful. And that's what happened to me. I care what people think about me. And it's hard when people are like, well, you shouldn't care. It's like, well, that's not going to happen tomorrow. It's like, you care. And also I had the expectation that people would be behind me and that didn't happen. So I wasn't ready for it. I wasn't ready for that. And not that anyone should have to be ready for it. And that's when I shut down social media and I didn't go on social media for almost a year. I just shut it down and I got depressed and I didn't want to hear from anyone. And that put a stop to the fix, like the stop of my voice being able to fix the system. And that was awful for one comment to have that much effect. That I stopped and I didn't, maybe I would have never written the book or spoke up about his incident because of that one ridiculous off the cuff comment coming from one person that I don't know her background. I don't know where she came from. Maybe she had a very good point because something happened to her. I don't know. Um, but that's not my area to figure out. But I'm sad that I lost a year
Hmm.
of advocacy because of one comment. Yeah.
Hmm. It's so important that we talk about this. I actually
Yeah.
wrote a post a couple of weeks ago about I actually view victim shaming no different from abuse. And
Yeah.
it's oftentimes it's not intentional, right?
No.
But
No.
what it does, it silences
Hmm. Yes,
people,
it does.
you know? And we already suffer in silence.
Hmm.
So to have the courage to speak up and then be frozen
Yep.
as a result of, and I say it's ignorance, right? I'm not going to
Hmm.
sugarcoat it. I think a lot of times people's inconsiderate responses is due
Hmm.
to ignorance. We don't
Yep.
have enough conversations
Mm-mm.
about emotions. We don't have enough
Mm-mm.
conversations about the impact that other people's actions have on
Hmm.
our well-being and our mental health.
Yep.
And I think if we did, I think it will open up the opportunity for us to make changes. But we
Hmm.
push it under the rug, somebody might have clocked that, it impacted you. But what do
Yeah.
I do about that? I mean, that's your stuff, right?
Right.
No, it's everybody's stuff.
Hmm.
It's everybody's stuff. And unfortunately, in society, we tend not to care
Hmm.
until the problem is on our doorstep. And
Correct.
then when it's on our doorstep, what
Hmm.
happens,
Yeah.
Melissa? We want
We
sympathy,
do. We do. We
right?
want to ignore all the stuff we have said in the past, and well, because now it happened to me, and I realized that's a choice, and at that moment I chose to give that person the power to take me down,
Hmm.
and I'm upset about that. Yeah, like why did I let her do it? I let her take me down. That could have been a choice. Not that I even realized it at the time. It just was hurtful, and so I said, well, that's it. I'm not putting my story out there anymore, because I also wondered, okay, that was one voice, and then I made this assumption that the majority thought this way, which
With
is
small
ridiculous.
voices.
Yeah,
Yes. But
because
you
my
know what?
brain just went, oh, is that what the world thinks? Well, no, no, no. That's just what
Hmm.
this lady thought. Yeah.
And see, you bring up two more interesting things,
Hmm.
right? Excuse me. How much control we actually do have, right? Like,
Hmm.
it, I remember someone saying to me, your anger is a choice.
Yeah.
Your anger, and I remember thinking, what are you talking about?
Can't
How
control
could I
this.
choose this, right?
No.
But we have way more control over our
Yes.
lives than we
Hmm.
recognize. And I think one of the gifts
Hmm.
of exiting survival mode
Yeah.
is that radical ownership that we tend to take. Like,
Hmm.
I've recognized that I've wasted a year. I've
Yeah.
recognized I've wasted decades here.
Yeah.
And now I'm going to really push forward to step into my purpose and be
Hmm.
impactful. And the
Yeah.
second thing that really was interesting was your thought process. You mentioned, like,
Yeah.
I had to think about it differently.
I had
You
to.
know,
Hmm.
it's yeah, it all, even though people's journeys are the same, it kind of
Yeah.
all ends up like this, like almost like a rebellion
Yeah.
against what we
Hmm.
don't discuss and what we don't talk about.
Hmm. Yeah. I had to realize that. I had to realize that I was facing one person's opinion, and then I manifested that into I thinking half the world thinks this, which is, and then I had to just go, so what? There's people like my son, and there's that need someone to speak up, and then not to engage in that conversation with that person, right? Because like, no, your comment is yours, and you're free to make it. And
Hmm.
I'm not going to engage in that. I don't owe you an explanation of why I chose to have, caregivers in my child's life. I'm not going to engage in that. I'm going to focus on my mission. And somewhat, I still can't, because I still talk about it. And mind you, this was what, oh gosh, almost 10 years ago, still in the
Hmm.
back of my head, right? This person. Um, and it's like I just had to not give that any power. I said, no, the mission is more important, the people's opinions, and I need to protect, and I need to have a voice for all the people that are suffering in silence in care facilities.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love the power that you harnessed as a
Hmm.
result of being able to change the way
Yeah.
You framed it.
Hmm.
And
And
that's what
also
it
what
boils
I'm,
down to.
yeah, and what
Go
I'm
ahead.
doing, and also what I realize is that it's going to all usually be negative. There's not going to be any praise because, people don't even understand what you're right. People in long-term care and stuff, they don't, they live in the system and they just feel like that's just what it is and they deal with it and they live with it. And what's sad is they don't expect anybody to do anything different, you know.
Hmm.
And we've dealt with since my child was born, um, in 1996, and I thought, well, if he ever needs long-term care, it'll be fixed by then. I was wrong. So
I mean, we chuckle, but the reality, I mean, it's
it's
disappointing, you know.
it's
Um, we progress, but I think oftentimes it's in the wrong direction or,
mhm.
you know, this conversation has really been, it was maybe unexpected, Melissa, I think.
Yeah, yeah, because yeah, and it's also because something it did happen to me, but it more so happened to my son. So
Hmm.
when I hear about these trauma and pain, I just like, no, I also had that because
Hmm.
being his mother, it didn't directly happen. These things didn't. My limbs weren't broken like my son's were, but um, yeah, traumatic. So I think any
Traumatic.
caregiver or parent or and you watch a loved one go through this, it's there's a trauma there. Hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it goes back to the residual impacts of trauma. It does not just affect the person, the
No.
quote unquote victim. It has a ripple effect to
Hmm.
those that are around them, those that have to interact and, you
Yep.
know,
Hmm.
yeah. So, what are you working on currently, Melissa, and where
Hmm.
can our listeners connect with you?
Yeah. So I have a website that kind of talks about all these issues and where I'm going to sort of speak and tell my story. That's www.whocaresbooks, books with an S, whocaresbooks.com. And then you can find a link to get my book. I'll also be posting tips for people that are dealing with the healthcare system and how to advocate for yourself. And yeah, and just if I can ask just the regular, just everyday people that if you see people, vulnerable adults, disabilities, nursing homes, not to look away and to help and to speak up for people that can't speak up for themselves.
I love that.
Mm-hmm.
And do you have one takeaway for the
Mm-hmm.
listeners who might maybe resonate with your journey
Yeah.
to and through survival mode? What is one key takeaway that they can action?
Mm-hmm. Um, I think it's going to be that we need to connect with each other. We need to have the conversations. We have to realize that that people with vulnerabilities like disabilities or older generations that they need help and they need us to speak up and not don't look away, you know, that you have a voice, you are of value.
Yeah, you have a voice
Yeah.
and you have value.
Yes.
Yes. Powerful, powerful. So,
Mm-hmm.
listeners, thank you so much. Melissa, again, thank you for your time. I mean, this conversation was very enlightening. You took me through all the emotions. Um, and listeners, as a reminder, you were not built to break, but you damn sure were not built to just survive. Disrupt the
Mm-hmm.
cycle, reclaim your life, and thrive on your own terms. I will
Mm-hmm.
see you next week.